Get ready to travel, singular L, to far off distant worlds in this review of Traveller, double L's. Let's dive in. As you can probably tell, this isn't just simply Traveller with two L's, second edition by Mongoose Publishing. This is actually the updated version from 2022, released earlier this year in January, if I'm not mistaken. And it's about, let's see, how many pages are we running? 263 pages, nothing on the inside cover, updated layout, improved visuals, spacecraft construction chapter is brand new for this, and the errata is also included. And as you see, this book is very bare bones. We're already here at the table of contents and the credits, like right on the first page. And flipping over to the next is going to be the introduction. So like with many books, the introduction for this game it's your typical one. It tells you who the players are and what the referee is and what their jobs are. I do appreciate the further reading section, mainly because this actually tells you all of the different supplements that would be of interest to you. For example, you have the Traveller Companion, which adds new player options. High Guard, back in the day, was for vehicles, I believe. It added a lot of spaceship stuff. And in fact, High Guard is getting updated for later this year. It's also getting revised. And a lot of the stuff that we got from the Spacecraft Construction came from High Guard. There's a book on the Third Imperium, which is the default setting, and all sorts of different. And I do really appreciate that because it's a good starting off point, because there's a ton of expansions or supplements. Let me be honest, there's like a lot of it. Then, of course, you have your game conventions, so like things like 1D or 2D, which is basically just saying you're rolling one six-sided dice and two six-sided dice, adding them up. D3, so it's just rolling a three-sided die. And D66, which I always seem to mix up. You're just rolling two six-sided dice, and it's a range of 11 to 66. You're not really rolling like 66-sided dice or anything like that. So there is that. You also have different tech levels from TL0, which is very primitive, to TL15, which is high stellar, and yes, it just goes up to that. A lot of the times you'll be playing in probably maybe TL13, 14, and sometimes 15. Higher tech levels exist, although they're probably in other universes, or maybe they could be like ancient civilizations that have that, and that sort of tech is just lost time and stuff like that. So it is what it is. I think a lot of books that come after Traveller definitely take a lot of inspiration from this. Like I remember Esper Genesis kind of followed this fairly closely, and I know that Stars Without Numbers also did this as well. And so the introduction chapter is very just short, neat, tells you what you need to know, and let's move on to character creation. Here is my first big gripe with this book. Look at the transition between chapters. Here we are at the introduction, and this is Traveller Creation. Would you even know that you're in a different chapter just by flipping through these pages? Like, seriously, most book I read have like some sort of an artwork. Like, look, even the beginning has a nice little piece of art that definitely draws your eye and says, oh wait, we must be into an actual chapter now. But no, you don't get that in this book. You just go from one section to the next, and the only way that you're going to tell that you're even in a different chapter is on the big orange letters at the top. That's it. There are some things that I really like about this chapter, but there's also some things that kind of irritate me. I can understand that characteristic modifiers hiding here at the beginning of the chapter, but background skills, like this is one of the first things that you're going to be looking at, and it's just kind of like tucked right here. Like, it took me longer than I care to admit to even realize that background skills were actually here and not like on the actual career page, which I kept looking for when I was going through my preliminary character creation stuff. But yeah, your background skills are right here. It would have been nice if they had actually brought more attention to that. Maybe even put it in like a nice blue box, like your physical characteristics and mental characteristics. But yeah, whatever. You actually do get a very nice handy dandy chart for how character creation does work. And I love this table right here because it draws your eye where it needs to go and it breaks the whole process down by steps. So we have your characteristics, start here, characteristics, roll 2D for every characteristics, calculate your dice modifier, move down to your backgrounds, and that's your background skills. You also choose your homeworld. Then you can either do pre-career education, but that's optional, or you can move on to start a new term, and then it just keeps going. You just follow the arrows, and you know, it's very intuitive, but that's just the first thing because you go through the whole entire process. You're creating a character and their entire career. So it's basically like developing the life of a character that you're going to play, and a lot of it is randomized, and that might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I really did enjoy it. I built two characters and one with my wife, and I had a lot of fun each time that I built it, even if one of my characters wasn't quite as optimal as I would have liked it to be. But you can go through your pre-career education, so that's like joining a university or joining the military academy. You have different events that can happen while you're there, and it just goes on and on for each of the different careers, like agent, army, citizen, drifter, entertainer, marine, merchant, navy, noble, rogue, scholar, and scout. They each have their own 2 pages that you're going to need to know, like benefits for when you actually leave the career, your skills that you can get develop while you're in that career, your ranks and bonuses that you get by ranking up in that career, any mishaps that can happen. So if you fail your survival role in order to stay in that career, you get a mishap instead, and you're probably going to get kicked out of that career. Or you might have an event that happens, and there's also life events that can happen, which I didn't get to really show in my character creation video, but you can have some really cool life events happen, and some of them are not so good. But there, it just goes on for each of the different careers. You have like these 2 page spreads, and I really do like just the organization of this chapter alone. You don't really see it very well in the rest of the book. The rest of the book is pretty much written like a textbook, which kind of really takes it away from me a lot. And some things that I would have expected to find in this chapter are elsewhere. So here we have our life events and other benefits and stuff like that. You have things like aging and what happens if you get injured. If you leave a career, some of your medical expenses might be paid for. Skill packages are also here. And then you have 2 different alien races, aside from human, that you can play with. You have the Aslan, and then you have the Vargar, which, honestly, I would have put these at the very beginning, maybe even before character creation, just so that it's there. But it's back here. And then, of course, you have your post-career education, which just says, even though you're playing the game, you're not specifically tied to a career anymore, you can still learn skills. You can still get trained in skills. It just takes a lot of time. Prisoner, I also would have put at the end of the different careers because this is number 13. But it's all the way tucked in the back of this, and the next page is skills and tasks. So a lot of the layout issues that I have with this book are just things that are misplaced a little bit. Like the prisoners and the Vargar and the Aslan. It's just kind of a little wonky here and there, and I can't really just explain why that is. But overall, I really do enjoy character creation for this game, and I really wish that a lot of other games would kind of follow something similar to this, where you develop, the life of your character instead of just saying, oh, well, level 10 warrior started off as a farm lad, and then this happened and this happened and his parents died and this. It just kind of really, I don't really care for that style of creating a character anymore. Not after going through this process. I like the randomness and the fun. It really reminds me of a board game called Call to Adventure. Now, Call to Adventure is, it's a game where you build your own hero with cards and stuff, and it's a competitive game that you can play with other people. And they actually just finished a Kickstarter for their next expansion, which is supposed to heavily tie in Dungeons and Dragons character creation for fantasy. And I think that's really cool because that actually makes the whole character creation process and actually makes it fun. So I really do like that, this book takes a different approach to character creation because it's really fun. So let's talk about skills and tasks. This chapter is split into two sections. First, you have how to make skill checks and all the supplemental rules that go with it, and then you have the actual skills themselves. When you make a characteristic check, you roll 2d6. Okay, that's pretty much standard. You're always going to roll 2d6, and you're going to add appropriate dice modifiers. So just add the dice modifier from strength, dexterity, endurance, intelligence, education, or social to your 2d6 roll. If the total is 8 or higher, you succeed. It's pretty simple. For skill checks, it's the same process. You roll 2d6, add the skill rank, if any, and add the characteristic dice modifier, if applicable, and you roll from there. Although for skill checks, you also have task difficulties. So some tasks are going to be a little bit harder than others. So your average is always going to be an 8 or above. So you might have like a formidable task where you'll have to roll a 14 or higher, or impossible where you need to get 16 or higher. So remember, you're rolling 2d6, so you're going to have 12 at the max, so you're going to be relying on your dice modifiers and your skill modifiers to really bump up some of those numbers. There are degrees of success. They're called effect results. And this I'm actually not a huge fan of, but that's just because of the way that it's explained here. Like, I do realize that there needs to be some sort of degree of success and failure. It just, I'm like, anytime where I actually have to refer back to a table that's tucked away in like some random page, like 61, it really does take the enjoyment out of the game for me. Of course, I could just write this on a card, or get a GM screen that has all this information, but yeah, that's hunting for information, and that takes time away from playing. So it's really nothing special. So like, I might have an average success, which is 1 to 5 over, or an exceptional success, which is 6 or more above your target number. You might have a marginal failure, where you just miss it by 1, or an average failure, which just misses it by 2 to 5, or you might have an exceptional failure. And a lot of the times when you have opposed rolls, you're actually looking at the degrees of success or failure. So let's say that one person gets an average success, but the other person gets an exceptional success. The person with the exceptional success wins the roll for those effects and stuff like that. You do have boons and banes. Boons, whenever you roll your 2d6, you're rolling an extra die and you're taking the higher number. Banes are when you take the lower number. So basically advantage and disadvantage if you're thinking of it in 2d6 terms. And then there are your skills. And my gosh, there are a ton of them. And that's both good and bad. Let's be honest. The sci-fi encompasses a lot of things. Tech, stuff like that. It's science fiction. And so I think that this game does a very good job in encompassing that broad range. But of course, whenever you have a lot of skills, you're going to find out very quickly that some of those skills are going to be just bloat. They're not going to do anything for you for that specific game. Like, I might have game that I'm running, but we would probably never ever have a need for animal handling or anything like that. So somebody who actually rolls into that and actually has a couple points into that, that's just going to waste. Now, of course, if I was a good GM, I would find ways of implementing that, but that might just be once or twice in the whole course of our campaign. But of course, if I was a good GM, I would create the campaign because this is a very sandbox heavy game. So for skills, you have things like admin, advocate, animals, and of course there are some specialties. Like for animals, you have animal handling, veterinary, and training. Then of course you have art, which has a lot of specialties, astrogation, athletics, from dexterity, endurance, and strength, broker, carouse, deception, diplomat, drive, and of course there's lots of different types of vehicles to drive, electronics, you have comms, computers, remote ops, and sensors, engineer, explosives, flyers for your flying ships like airships, grav ships, ornithopters, rotor ships, wing ships, gambler, gunner, gun combat, heavy weapons, investigate. Jack of all trades is a very interesting skill because normally if you're not trained in a skill and you have to make a roll for said skill, you automatically take a -3 dice modifier to that check. The Jack of all trades subtracts that negative dice modifier by 1 for each skill rank you have in it, and the maximum that you're ever going to want is, I believe, 4, because that basically gets rid of the dice modifier. So very interesting to have a couple points put into that skill alone. You have language, which, okay, sure. Leadership, mechanic, medic, melee, navigation, persuade, pilot, profession, recon, science, seafarer, stealth, steward, streetwise, survival, tactics, vac-suit. This is like the ABCs of skills here. You're just going and going and going until it's all over. The best thing that I like about this chapter specifically is that each of the skills does have examples of how to use these skills, as well as characteristics that could be associated with that skill roll. The formatting, though, is quite atrocious. This really reminds me of Star Wars from FFG stat blocks, and on that level of atrocious. Like, let's take a look at Persuade right here. Persuade is a more casual, informal version of diplomat. It covers fast talking, bargaining, leading, and bluffing. It also covers bribery or intimidation. Bluffing your way past the guard, a post-persuade check, 1d minutes, int or soch, followed by haggling in a bazaar. I am thankful, though, that they did italicize, I guess, the skill usage or the trait or whatever you want to call it. And then the actual explanation is not italicized. That does help a little bit, but it's just like a big block of just text, like for stealth and all of those that actually have a ton. Like athletics is by far the worst, like dexterity, and then you have climbing, juggling, throwing for alien species with wings, also includes flying, and it just goes on and on and on. And my gosh, it's just a nightmare to read. At least put some things in bold or give some bulleted points, something to help, because my little eyes like to pretend that they're ADHD and just go all over the place. It's a nightmare to read. Let's dive into combat. This really is the second part of how to play the game, but, for combat. This, like any other game that focuses on combat encounters, you're going to start with initiative. And you can actually use dexterity or intelligence for your initiative, which I find amusing. Of course, something that's really cool about this, a character can make a tactics check at the start of combat, and they're going to add that to all of their allies' roll for initiative. So if you have somebody that is good at, tactics military, I think, then they could roll that and add that initiative dice modifier to everybody's initiative roll. And it also works the same with space combat. It's just tactics navy for that. you have things that are broken up by combat rounds. You have things like significant actions, minor actions, and free actions, the things that are standard. Reactions, though, is kind of different. First off, you can actually make any number of reactions, like straight up. But every time you make a reaction, you suffer an accumulative dice modifier -1 to your next set of actions. And that actually confuses me, that wording right there. Does it encompass like everything that you do on that turn or just the next action? I don't really know specifically. And so some reactions are things like dodging, diving for cover, and parrying. So it really reminds me of Alien RPG combat. It's just you can do a lot of it. You can do as many as you want, but you're going to suffer some consequences for that. So let's say that you do get hit. HP is a little wonky, so bear with me. Damage, when you get hit, reduces your endurance characteristic. Once that's depleted, you either start taking away from your strength or your dexterity. You actually get to choose. If all of your physical characteristics, that's endurance, strength, and dexterity, go to 0, you are straight up killed. In hindsight, this does actually make a lot of sense. As your physical characteristics take a hit, your dice modifiers for said characteristics lower. So like the more hits I take, I'm not going to be aiming as well, or I'm not going to be swinging as hard with my melee weapons. I just kind of wish that there was HP, but then again, this works fine. Actually, it probably works a lot better than fine. I'm just being a dingus about it. For the most part, the rules for combat actually do make sense. There isn't anything too outrageous. There's just a lot of detail. And some of the details is actually greatly explained. Like in grappling, you have bullet points for what you do. But sometimes you're going to be looking for the hidden rules within paragraphs, like for dual weapons, which I'm not a big fan of. There's just a lot of things to keep track of, and the GM really has their work cut out for this type of a game. The last thing you have are weapon traits, things like APX or Auto X, Blast X, bulky, stun, very bulky, or the fact that it can actually work in 0G. So, always good when your weapons can work in G and in 0G. So let us go to encounters and dangers. This is kind of like the monster manual chapter, but it's not in the back of the book. It's really weird, but oh well. This actual chapter has very little monster examples in it, but there's actually a big reason for that, and that's because of the rules. First off, I'm going to admit, the disease rules are very brutal. Like, you fail an endurance check and your endurance characteristic takes damage. So that means you take damage the first time, your dice modifier is probably going to get lowered for that next attempt. So you better have a buddy here who is really good at helping you out medically. The same thing is with poisons. The only difference is for diseases, you're taking a dice roll, like maybe a couple hours or a couple days or a couple weeks. But for poisons, it's either every so many seconds or every so many minutes. So you're making more rolls for poisons. The good thing is you pass it, your roll, you are healed from that, if I'm not mistaken. And radiation, that's its own other thing. It's actually pretty rad. Pun. The amount of rads a character takes or is exposed to accumulates over the course of their lifetime. So, for example, if I take like 50 rad damage one day and I heal that, but then another day I take another 50, that's 100 rads I am exposed to over the course. And I'm going to have an immediate effect, and then I might have a cumulative effect. So, for example, if I take 151 to 300 rads cumulatively over the course of my lifetime, I'm going to have -1 endurance permanently. And it just keeps on going on and on until you get to 801 more 1 rads or more. You're going to have 8d damage, internal bleeding effect immediately, and then you're going to have -4 endurance permanently. So, really scary stuff. You better wear your protective gear, let's just say. Healing is also really interesting because it's more realistic in my eyes, or at least on paper. First aid can only be used within the first minute after an injury has been suffered, and it makes use of the medic education check, with points being recovered in tandem with effect. So remember that ruling about effect that I spoke about later? Yeah, it comes and it goes and it goes and it keeps on going. Surgery is used when there is still damage after first aid has been applied. Despite the possibility of recovering more characteristic points, failure also means taking more damage. So, risk and reward. Surgery also requires being at a hospital or in a sick bay. You can't do this in the middle of the field, or at least not well. Once one characteristic has been brought back to maximum value, a character can take advantage of medical care. More points are restored here per each day of bed rest. It is also possible for a character to take mental damage, either intelligence or education, but the rules for recovery seem rather lackluster. Like, you heal at a rate of 1 point per day, but like, what about therapy or psychology or stuff like that? Like, Mothership makes use of those types of skills, and I would have thought that, in the future there would be a need for, mental doctors like that, and that would actually help. Or like, what about mental, injuries that you might suffer from, or actually like injuries physically, like there aren't any injuries or anything like that, like no critical hits, not that I know of, or anything like that isn't here. Like, what? Really? Okay. Also, I'm not a really big fan of the unconscious rule. So, an unconscious traveler may make an endurance check after every minute. If successful, they regain consciousness. If they fail, they must wait another minute before trying again. This time with a cumulative DM +1 for every previous check failed. But what about, like, being unconscious for like a day or something like that? I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but like, really? It just doesn't really make sense here in game terms. I just kind of wish that some of these mechanics were a little bit more realistic, I guess. Who knows? Maybe I'm getting it wrong. Maybe people only stay unconscious for a couple minutes, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case. Something that should have been mentioned in the combat chapter is range bands. So the game actually does use range bands, but something that I'm actually really thankful for is that they actually give a numerical value for the different ranges. For example, medium range is from 11 to 50 meters. And yes, this game does use meters. Vary distance is over 5 kilometers. And depending on your encounter, it's going to change the distances for your range bands. Like spaceship combat is going to use the same range bands, it's just going to have a lot higher distance to that said target. And so this actually does come into effect here because we're talking about encounters and meeting creatures and aliens and stuff like that. And creatures, let's speak about creatures. Creatures have all sorts of traits like alarm, amphibious, armor, bioelectricity, camouflage, disease, echolocation. There's just a lot of different things that you can use when you build your creatures. So let's actually take a look. These are some of the animals for alien worlds, and you're going to see that there's only about 6 of them here, or 6. From the Carthus, the Eracrul, the Gazal, the Clean Sea Sifter, the Nibon, and the Ruta. These are just examples, and I guess I should say this. Anytime you have a science fiction game and you're using creatures or animals, I always find it really awkward. Mainly because, you might be in one world where you might see a gazelle or an Eracrul, but then you go to a different world and the whole ecosystem is completely different. You're probably not going to see the same creatures on a different planet. Now, having said that, I do realize it is a definite possibility that there might be alligators and penguins, maybe on Pluto or Neptune rather, because have you ever been to Neptune? Well, I certainly haven't, but it's a possibility. So until we are actually proven when we find life on another world, I guess the fact of the matter is we just don't know. But for now, I'm going to say that different worlds mean different animals. So, there. So despite the lack of actual creatures here, this game gives you something even better. This game actually gives you a way to create your own creatures quickly. Yes, you have a nice little chart that you can look through, figure out the behavior of said creature, how big it is, and then you kind of go from there. You develop its characteristics, their dice modifiers. It's all done very, very quickly, and I really do appreciate that they're giving you tools to actually create things because it's science fiction. It's a whole universe encompassing, game system. So it's up to your imagination to create different things, and it's not just limiting you to these 6 creatures and that's it. It's giving you the tools to actually make more. And it's also fast, so thankfully. But what about humanoid characters? Well, yeah, there's the same thing. You have tools to create humanoid NPCs, basically. Although I will say there's a little bit more that goes into the process. You're not going to be going through the entire character creation process for a basic level grunt, thank goodness, because that would just take forever. You just choose their experience level, so either a green non-combatant, a green combatant, average non-combatant, and they'll have some skills, and they'll have average skill levels, and then they'll have dice modifier to all their characteristics, or to some of their, I guess, more trained characteristics, things that they would use, and then you just kind of roll with that. You also have things like patrons and missions, so you can have a random patron, you can have random missions, random targets, random opposition, random encounters, and starport, rural encounters, urban encounters. It's all here. I mean, this is called the Encounters and Dangers chapter for a reason. It's just giving you so many tools to use to create the game that you want to run or play. And that is where this book's strengths really lie. For now, let's talk about equipment. This has got to be one of my favorite chapters in the entire book, mainly because of the artwork. Like, take a look at this. Yeah, look at that beauty. Or this, the reflect armor, cloth armor, a black armor. I just really like the artwork in this chapter alone. This is something that I would actually just love to show my players, hey, this is what your guy is wearing. And they'll be like, ooh, that looks so cool. This is like something that you would find in a video game. And I really dig that. I mean, it's futuristic looking, it looks really slick and cool, and it's stuff that I would really like to see more of, because there's not a whole lot of it. So for equipment, you have things like armor. And by the way, this is all alphabetical, so we're starting with A's for armor. And that is both a blessing and a problem in of itself. You have things like augment, so cybernetics that you can wear or augment your person with. And I do appreciate and like that each item has a description of it, so you actually know what you are getting into, or if it has like some sort of ability, it's also listed there as well. Rules for installing augments is also listed here. You have things like communication devices, so it's actually based on the tech level, and you kind of run it from there. Computers and software, same thing. There's a lot more that goes into computers though. Medical and care supplies. This also encompasses drugs and stims. Sensors, things like binoculars or a bioscanner. Pretty cool stuff. Survival gear and supplies. Things like a breathing mask, a grav belt, or tent. There's 2 different types of tents I see. It's just kind of funny. I just now noticed that. And then you have your weapons at the very end. So I personally would have liked to have had weapons right next to armor, but it is categorized, and we're starting with melee weapons. There's a lot of melee weapons, so if you want to like use some sort of apocalyptic style gaming, or maybe like a medieval world that your players happen to crash land on, then you have things like a rapier or a blade or a broadsword, clubs. Okay, that's all here to use. Then you have slug throwers, things that pump out bullets. And you have energy weapons, things that create lasers. Grenades, there's like 4: aerosol, frag grenades, smoke grenades, and stun grenades. Heavy weaponry, things that you're going to use 2 hands for and that will wreck your stuff up. Things like rocket launchers and grenade launchers. Explosives. I will also say that there are weapon mods, but there's like only 7 of them, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get fleshed out more in the different other supplements, so I'm not too bent out about it. But there are some here if you want to use them. So, let's talk about vehicles. I don't know why, but vehicles have never really interested me in games like this, which I find very strange because there are so many options and ideas that can be explored. I mean, other than spaceships, but spaceships are its own thing, and I've never really used vehicles in my games. I know some of my players have had speeders and stuff like that in my Star Wars campaigns, and yeah, I've just never really made a big deal out of having a vehicle or utilizing them. Vehicles utilize a speed band, which determines how fast they are going, and this will come into play during chases and stuff like that. And then we have vehicle stats. So we have equipment and traits, that's tech level, any skills that they use, like drive wheel or drive grav, things like that. Agility, how easy the vehicle is to drive or pilot. This is applied as a dice modifier to all checks made to control the vehicle. A speed, the maximum speed band the vehicle is capable of traveling. The range, that it can travel without refueling. The crew, how many members the vehicle requires. Passengers, additional passengers that can actually be carried in the vehicle. How much cargo space it has. Its hull, which is the measure of how much damage the vehicle can sustain before it is destroyed or rendered inoperable. Shipping, how much space the vehicle will require for transport on a spacecraft, which is fairly good to know. I mean, in my other Star Wars games, we were stuffing all sorts of different stuff in our Wayfinder or whatever it was called, like spaceships and speeders, and yeah, the cost, and of course armor. This is how well the vehicle can resist damage. So all that is here in nice stats. And in addition to that, if your vehicle has weapons mounted on it, you're going to want to know what its firing arc is. Vehicles can initiate a dogfight, but only if they are within 1 kilometer of each other and within 1 speed band. Each driver makes an appropriate check, either drive, flyer, or seafarer, and modified by the vehicle's agility. The winner can attack the other vehicle with whatever mounted weapons they have. In a tie, neither can attack. So narratively, this means that in a dogfight, you're maneuvering around to get within the enemy vehicle within your firing arc. You pass your skill check, you beat the other, they are within your firing arc, and you can make an attack. In a tie, you're just at a stalemate, just trying to drive and maneuver around each other. I really do like that there are critical hit effects. I just really wish that there was something similar for like combat critical hits, but again, as I've already mentioned, are there even crits in combat? There are collision rules, and they're actually pretty straightforward and not complicated at all. You simply roll 1d6 times the speed band. If you're not strapped in, well, see you on the other side. For those smart enough to wear seatbelts, you only take 1/4 of that damage. So yeah, always wear a seatbelt, kids. And then of course you have your example vehicles, like your air raft or your ATV, the Buddhist heavy cargo truck, your cargo lifter. Really do like how each of these vehicles does have some sort of an image attached to it, even if it is 3D art. I don't really mind that much for equipment and stuff like that. So there's few vehicles, but again, I do know that there is a vehicle supplement that's probably going to add a ton more stuff and probably more rules as well. So without further ado, let's get into Spacecraft Operations. So you want to drive your fancy spaceship across the galaxy for some fame and fortune. Well, the first thing you're going to learn is that you have a ship, you're already in debt. You might even have ship shares, which kind of equates to 1 million credits. Unfortunately, you can't exchange shares for cash. You may be lucky enough to start the game with a small ship, though. This is the ship sheet. I do not have any experience with ship sheets because I have not created my own ship yet. So we're going to skip that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, like mortgage and fuel and life support, salaries, math. Why math? But there are all sorts of rules for ships, including power and running out of power, which is really scary, especially if you're out in space. Like, I already have enough troubles drowning in the ocean and stuff like that, but like being abandoned in space, like Renoa in Final Fantasy VIII, that's just like terrifying. There are rules for maintenance and running costs, which is something I'm actually a really big fan of, and I try to implement that in my own Star Wars game, like to little success because everybody's trying to get out of paying dock fees for some reason. Then you've got like random encounters, like space encounters and stuff like that, which is also pretty cool. And there are some very specific rules for jump travel. In short, FTL is a long process, and in most games, they only take place over a few sectors. There is more information on creating sectors, but that's going to be like literally the last chapter in this book. Also, a pilot does have to stay awake for like the entire duration of the jump, which makes coffee like literally a godsend. Something that I find very interesting is the concept of passengers. And we'll also touch up on this in the trade chapter. But there are different types of passengers that you can actually get onto your ship. You can deck out your ship like a cruise ship and attract high-paying passengers, or you can just give the bare minimum, which is like a cryogenic chamber, and you just put the passengers to sleep, which is actually terrifying because each person that is cryogenically frozen does have to make a check to wake up and survive. Like, you fail that check, you just die. That's scary. And then, of course, we have everything else that goes in a ship, like sensors, their ship computers, spacecraft security like cameras and stuff like that, locks. And then you have travel time and distance, and I hope you really like math because that's what calculating travel times is for. Yeah, I'm just really thankful that they have a nice handy-dandy table here. So that's what I'll be looking at. No need to calculate time is equal to 2 times the square root of distance divided by acceleration or whatever that is. Yeah, just look at the table. Trust me. Save your brain. Anyways, let's get into space combat. I'm not sure if anybody can really definitively agree on what the best game is for space combat. Like, I mean, you have Stars Without Numbers, Star Wars, you have this game, Traveller. I'm sure there's other games. I mean, like Mothership is also a lot of other smaller games, but I never really have heard anybody say definitively, oh, this is the ultimate spaceship combat system ever. But like most of those other games, your crew has an assigned duty. So pilot, captain, engineer, sensor operator, a turret gunner, bay gunner, marine, or passenger. There are all sorts of different duties for your crew to fulfill. When combat does start, each ship determines their initiative. So it's 2d6 plus the pilot's pilot skill plus the ship's thrust score. Yeah, math. The commander of a spaceship can make a tactics naval check to increase the ship's initiative. So we're making use of that tactics skill again, which is really cool. I do like that, certain skills are actually useful that you probably wouldn't think of. There are 3 different phases to ship combat. You have the maneuver step, and it's spelled weirdly here. I don't know why. They do that a lot here. But the maneuver step, each ship allocates thrust to either movement, which is getting closer or farther away, or maneuvering to dock with a ship, line up a shot, or dodge incoming fire. This phase is performed by the ship's pilot, obviously. Then you have the attack step. This is where each ship fires their weapons in initiative order. There are different weapons available for ships and different rules for some. There is a critical hit effect table, thankfully, because that's always good to have. Like the randomness and the chaos that it ensues. And then, of course, you have your action step. So this is where the rest of the crew gets to act. So they can like improve initiative for the captain. The engineer can initiate a jump. The engineer can put some systems offline and allocate power to like your weapons, which you're probably going to need. You can overload your drive, overload the plant, repair systems, reload turret, sensor lock, electronic warfare. So that's like hacking to the other ship and really screwing with them. Boarding actions for Marines and reassignment. So that's traveling from one area to the other. And just like with regular combat, you do have some reactions like evasive actions, a point defense. You can disperse some sand to deflect those laser attacks and stuff like that. Some of the weapons do have their own rules, like missile combat and countermeasuring, which is fine. I'm not really a big fan of the boarding action. So if your ship is close enough, you can initiate a boarding, of course. But it's really all based on a roll die. So if you have superior armor, you get a +1 to your dice modifier, or superior weaponry. If the defender has no Marines on duty, then they get negatives. But then you have different boarding like results, I guess, because these aren't really actions. But if you got a -7 or less, the attackers are soundly defeated. If the attacker's ship is docked with the defender may mount a new boarding action of their own and gain DM +4 on the roll to resolve it. It just kind of zooms the action out more than I would have liked. I would have liked to have zoomed in and actually had specific things to do in, when my Marines take over. Even if my players aren't the characters doing the boarding, I still would have liked to have zoomed in a little bit more and given my players like some options, but there isn't really any here. There could be some in another supplement, they're just not in here in the core rulebook. But, oh well. Let us go on to Spacecraft Construction. This is the chapter that was added into the 2022 edition. I believe this was ported from the High Guard supplement, which is also getting a revised edition later this year. Now, don't fret if you're thinking that you're going to have to construct all spaceships for this game. There are some examples, and we'll get into that later. This chapter is for when you want something custom made. Ooh, you got money to spend? It's time for something custom. But let's be honest, these ships are like in the millions of credits, and you're probably going to be in debt. I really like this design checklist. Very much like the Traveller Creation checklist, this one, it draws your eye to the different steps. It tells you what is coming up. It would have been nice to have a little bit more information for some of the steps, but oh well. You start off by creating a hull, and then you install your maneuver and jump drives. You install your power plant, fuel tanks, install the bridge, and it just keeps on going. But we'll take a look at the steps. You have 3 different hull configurations, from streamlined, which means it can actually travel in space and also in atmosphere. Then you have standard, which is kind of partially streamlined, and then you have a dispersed structure, which cannot go into the planets and stuff like that. It's only for space. Then you install your drives, and from this point on, you're going to have to do a lot of calculations. So get your TI calculators ready, boys and girls. So your drives are going to be determined by your tech level, I believe. And each drive that you get, like its maneuver TL and stuff like that, is also going to take over a percentage of your hull. So spaceship creation is always about fitting what you absolutely need within the hull that you're working with. So, yeah. So after you install your drive, you're going to install a power plant, because you're going to have to calculate your hull and the amount of power that you're going to need for your different systems, because your different systems are going to take so much power. And so, yeah, math is fun. Same thing with installing the fuel tanks. You're going to have to calculate how much fuel you have and stuff like that. The bridge is probably the easiest part, because depending on the size of a ship, you just allocate that much tonnage to your bridge size, which thankfully, because By this point, in step number 5, my brain has probably exploded by doing all of this math calculation. And you're going to install your computer, which is fairly straightforward. The better the computer, the more expensive it is. It doesn't really take up any room. Then you're going to install sensors. So all ships actually start with a basic sensor, and you can actually upgrade your sensor to be better. It just costs like a crap ton of money. You're going to install weapons. Just remember that weapons have a power cost as well as a credit cost. So maybe your power plant can only have certain systems function without the weapons being powered on, but then when you get into combat, you have to sacrifice some systems to power on your weapons and stuff like that. Kind of like in FTL, the video game. Then you have optional systems, and these kind of range from cargo space to concealed compartments and stuff like that. And you get to install your staterooms, and your staterooms are living spaces for crew and passengers. After that, you get to allocate any remaining space to cargo space, and then you're going to finalize your design. And this is basically the part where your teacher tells you to double check your math so that everything can actually fit in your ship without anything blowing up because you didn't carry that one when calculating power consumption. You didn't even use a calculator like you were supposed to. So, yeah, that's what that step is for. A lot of math here. It's not something that I would do on the fly, but it's probably something that I would actually have fun with if I had the time to actually sit down and do it. It's just very, very detailed, like everything else in this book. So let's talk about the common spacecraft. This is easily my favorite chapter in the entire book. This is a collection of ships that are commonly manufactured for either NPCs to use or your players to use, like you actually have a starting ship and this is where they live and stuff like that. So when I first opened up this chapter, I got really excited because what I found on this page right here. Symbols, but not just any symbols, map symbols. And in a rush, I flipped to the next page, and there it was, a scout courier type a spaceship, but my eyes beheld the glorious map that was on the opposite page. That is right. Each ship has its own map. That is a level of detail that I absolutely agree on. Like, these are just maps that I would take and plug them into my own Star Wars game. Like, my players are now raiding a derelict spacecraft, and hey, here's a map that goes with it. It's just so cool that each ship, each spacecraft has its own map. And it's very detailed, like, hey, that's a bed. That's probably a water closet. It's got its own symbols there. And it actually looks like the picture that it's showing. It's really detailed, and I love it. Some of the ships, though, gotta be honest, not a big fan of, but hey, whatever. Survey Scout. And there are all sorts of ships. Sizes, hull sizes, any ship to fit your need. There's just anything that you're gonna need is actually here. Oh yeah, the mercenary cruiser. Just drop that on a planet, and now your Marines are fit to go. Kind of like in Starship Trooper, but not really. Just a ton of different stuff. This is probably like the biggest chapter in the entire book. Yeah, I would go ahead and say that, just because each ship has its map, and that's really cool. I like that. So, enough about spacecraft. Let's talk about psionics. Because character creation by default is mostly random, getting psionic powers can be a little tricky. But when it does happen, here's where you go. Those who are lucky or unlucky enough to spec into psionics will have access to the psionic characteristic. It is worth mentioning that the older a character becomes, the less psi points they have to work with. So yeah, your psi points are diminishing over the course of your lifetime. So you're a psionic with cool powers. Well, not so fast. You have to get trained, and there are 5 different talents to learn from. Telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, awareness, teleportation. These are your different, styles of psionics that you can spec into. Now, let's say that you do have psionics and you decide to get trained. You actually take a test. You can take the psionics test to see if you learn any talents. But if you choose telepathy, you automatically gain it. You don't really take a test. You don't have to roll anything. You just automatically get it. And that's only if it's your first one. Also, each test that you take afterwards gets an accumulative dice modifier of -1 per check. So, yeah. You might want to pick the ones that you really want first and hope that you get it. But your psionic talents really kind of remind me of Stars Without Number, or I guess Stars Without Number should really remind me of this book because this one came first. But you have things like telepathy. Telepathy is the talent of mind-to-mind contact. It is normally subtle by nature, but can be used to bluntly crush the wills of those who oppose the telepath. You have things like life detection, mind link, telepathy, read surface thoughts, send thoughts, suggestion, probe, assault, shield. They all come with their own psionic or psi cost. So you spend that much psi points, you roll to see. Now I can't remember that if you spec into a psi talent, if you get all of the abilities listed, or if you have to go into training for that. I can't really remember, and I couldn't really find the answer when I was looking through it. But I assume that you just get all of them, which kind of seems pretty powerful. But then again, I guess that's the point. Then you have clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is a talent that allows a person to sense events at some location displaced from the viewer. And of course, there are different abilities like sense, tactical awareness, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. You have telekinesis. Telekinesis is the talent that allows objects to be manipulated without physically touching them. So you got telekinesis, you have flight, telekinetic punch, microkinesis, pyrokinesis. You have awareness, which is the psionic talent that allows fine control of one's own body. Awareness powers never have reach. They are used only on the traveler themselves. Awareness is not capable of affecting others and may never be used for healing or enhancing other travelers. So things like suspended animation, enhanced strength, enhanced endurance, fortitude, inspiration, regeneration. So teleportation, it actually doesn't even look like it's its own category, but it is. It looks like it's tucked in under awareness, but it isn't. Teleportation is actually both funny and unique. Teleportation is the talent that allows effectively instantaneous movement from one point to another point without regard to intervening matter. Psionic teleportation is limited to the movement of the teleported traveler's body, and for highly skilled teleports, their clothing and equipment. So yeah, you're probably going somewhere else naked. So hope you have a stash of clothing where you're going. Now, this is really interesting because of the rules about energy and momentum. When you teleport, you effectively either raise or lower your body temperature by a lot. And that can be very problematic. Now, there are some items that we'll see later on, actually right here, the teleportation suit. This device can be integrated into a suit of armor or worn as a form-hugging bodysuit. It rapidly cools or warms the body after a teleport, minimizing the damage from sudden energy gains or losses. So, yeah, when you teleport, it's probably gonna hurt unless you have some sort of protection from it. Now, there is a Psion class, and it really does make sense for it to be back here because, this is the Psionic chapter, and it's not a career that you're supposed to actively choose. Like, this is something that you randomly get, or you might randomly get Psionic psi points or stuff like that. And once you have psi points, then you can get trained and stuff like that, and that's when you would go to the Psion class. So it actually makes sense that it's here. But I probably would have put this entire chapter right after the character creation chapter. But hey, it isn't. It's back here. So let's talk about trade. One of the main attractions that I've noticed with a lot of other players or other games is that you can play the game that you want. You can have a combat-heavy game. You can have a social game. You can even have a game where you just go from place to place and you trade. Stars Without Numbers also does this. with about the same degree of success, I believe. There are typically three forms of trade: passengers, who are wanting to go from one place to the other. You have high passengers who would expect luxury, and then you have low passengers who you're stuffing into a cryo chamber and hoping that they survive the journey to pay you. You have shipping freight, which means you now work for Amazon. And you have speculative trade, and this is where you buy low and you sell high. This also can encompass smuggling, basically. Prices for freight and passengers are set in stone for the most part, and are dependent upon the type of passenger or the freight that you're taking in. So that's actually really good. For speculative goods, though, you'll have to figure out what you're buying or selling and where you're going. And of course, there's like a whole ton of stuff to buy, and base prices, and then you have different modifier prices. So yeah, I hope you like math, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. And I only ever had a college level degree of statistics, and still this makes my head hurt. My gosh. But oh well. That is pretty much trade in a nutshell. Lots of math. Hope you like it. Let's talk about worlds and universe creation. This is probably where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. And the cool thing is, this chapter can be used for any game. I've read comparisons between Traveller's Universe and Stars Without Numbers Creator. Maybe one day I'll actually do a proper video on it, but we're just going to go through what is in this book. If you're creating your own galaxy or whatever, you're probably going to limit your game to like a single sector or subsector. Heck, even if you're using the Third Imperium setting, you're still going to be making your own stuff. Now, let's actually define what a sector and a subsector is. A subsector is a group of hexagons, usually at 1 parsec in length and width, and it's arranged in an 8 to 10 pattern. A sector is a group of 16 subsectors in a 4x4 pattern. So really, you're just making a hexagonal map of your little tiny speck of the universe there, which is really cool. I really do like that. I've always been intrigued with hex maps and like hex style sandbox games, and having a sandbox style game that's sci-fi is definitely intriguing for me. There are all sorts of rules on how things work from sector to sector, such as like communication and how travel works. And I find it all very interesting. And when I went through my whole world building phase, I actually did take a lot of inspiration from Traveller, and like how I wanted the whole science stuff, communication, and how slow of a process FTL was. I actually took a lot of that inspiration from this game. So what do you put in a sector? Well, worlds, stars, anomalies, lots of things. The world creator is very, very detailed and very specific. First, you'll need to determine or roll for size. Then you'll do atmosphere, hydrographics, which is the amount of surface liquid on the planet, population, its government, cultural differences, law level, starports, the tech level of the planet, and any bases that are on that planet. I would definitely compare this to like a not as big and fancy version of Spectacular Settlements, but in a sci-fi setting, which if you've seen that series, you know how much I love that book. And this definitely reminds me of that. Just not as like a big chunk of a book. It's been streamlined to be just a single chapter, which is okay by me. Of course, if you are not up to the task for going through this whole process of creating your own universe, you can actually find plenty of random generators online that will actually map things for you too, which I found to be really cool. That way you're not spending like hours upon hours creating a single subsector or something like that. I really do like the universe creator here because it treats your sector like an old school hex map, like I've already stated before. The only thing that really does confuse me, for some reason, I just can't figure out why, are the code designations for your sectors or subsectors. Like, I know it's supposed to do with like what is in that subsector, but I just could not, like, every time I read it, I just could not just figure out what the codes are just by looking at it. I guess I'm just too stupid or something like that, but oh well. And then, of course, we have the index at the back, which is actually something that is new for the 2022 version. I don't understand it. I guess the old version didn't have an index, but okay. Oh well. And then, of course, you have different supplements and advertisement in the back. And so that is Traveller in a nutshell. So whenever I do my final thoughts, I do like to give them into 4 different categories, from core gameplay, artwork, layout, and content. So let's start with the core gameplay. Well, it's not a D20 system. It's a 2D6 system. So if you like your games hard, or perhaps even more realistic, in which your characters are not superpowered heroes that can withstand anything, then I think this would be the perfect game for you. It doesn't bring anything new, but as I stated again, it's not D20, so have fun with it, I guess. There's a lot of things to keep track of on the GM's part, but hey, isn't that usually the way it is? And I feel like a lot of the game systems try to emulate what Traveller has done with its starship combat. Like, you see the same things where your crew has a certain role and stuff like that. On paper, it seems like it could go by pretty quick, but I'm also not a fan of how boarding is dumbed down to simple roles with dice modifiers based on who has the most Marines, tech, and skill. There are a ton of skills, and some have specializations, and some of them may seem useful, but then some of them may not, and it really is dependent on what kind of a game your GM is playing here. So as I mentioned before, I kind of called it bloat. But the skill packages at the end of character creation actually does balance things out a little bit. I would actually give this a neutral rating because it's a very simple system and nothing really shines, nothing really stands out. I guess it's just an old system, but it's one that still works, don't get me wrong. It's just doesn't really bring anything new to the table, I guess. Let's talk about artwork. I suppose this one's kind of the elephant in the room, but not really. From my understanding, more artwork was added to this edition, and I really do like it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing on the art style or anything like that. I really like it, but there's also very little of it. I really like that all of the spaceships listed here have maps included, and that just sells me right there. This one gets a 6, a plus, an outstanding score. The layout, I'm not gonna lie, I am not a fan of the layout and the writing of this book, and I heard that they actually cleaned up a lot of it in this edition alone. I do not like hunting for useful information in paragraphs. Then again, there are some times when they provide bullet points for useful information. Tables are fairly easy to read and a godsend. The 2 most useful ones are the ones for character creation and the ones for spacecraft construction. But if I had to sum it up, this book is very textbook-like. And for that, I am giving it a neutral score. It was when I noticed that any information to being a GM was absent that I actually realized what this book is. And it does so brilliantly. Sure, there is a setting, the Third Imperium, but this book is first and foremost a system on creating a sci-fi game that you want to play, that you will enjoy. It gives you tools to build, and that's what I've come to want in a role-playing game. The book gives you ways to create creatures, NPCs, ships, worlds, universes, and let's not even forget about that super cool, awesome character creation process. Like, just creating things is well, at least NPCs, creatures, and stuff like that, is easy. It's sort of quick, and that's the point. I wish there were more games that actually took advantage of a character creation system like what you see here. Like, it's just so fun. It's like a game of itself, just to create a character, and that's really cool. Everything you need to create the sci-fi game you've always wanted to play, within reason, is here, and that's what makes this outstanding for me. So take it what you will. This is Traveller, the Core Rulebook, updated version 2022. The only other game that I could possibly compare to now is probably Stars Without Number. Although Stars Without Number is a D20 system, so if D20 systems are more of your jam for whatever reason, then you would probably go with that. But if you like having a system that actually has a really fun character creation process that you do with your players at the same time, then I would definitely choose Traveller. And if you're looking for a book with lots and lots of supplements to read through and waste your money on, then definitely go with Mongoose Publishing because they have a ton of stuff. Take it for what you will. But for now, feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series. And I will see you guys in the next video.